Hello friends, welcome to New Tech Dojo's new episode. PI will change to Dash in next 10 years. Today with me I have Brian Mardon. Hi Brian.
Hi, how are you this morning?
I'm doing good. So Brian is the BI solutions architect at IBM over last couple of years. Brian has a wide range of experience. He develops enterprise data warehouses for organizations across all the domains and helps them build into a cohesive framework. He's taken wide variety of roles over last 2 decades. He's been a, a sales manager, development manager, ETL developer, BI architect, data architect, uh, IT director, database administrator. Apart from IBM, he's worked with Microsoft, SAP, Washington State Department of Transportation, 22nd Century Technologies, and IdeaWorks. Brian, we're really privileged to have you on our episode.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
there's also few in this business too. There's also a few things like small contracts that a lot of us end up doing that are short time that you can't list, like uh, probably many state agencies like public instruction and things like that I've done shorter contracts for, administrator of the courts and things like that are
wow,
just 3-month design or reporting types of projects.
right.
And you'll see a lot of that in the business where you'll just have a very short time project that needs to, with a very specific task that needs to be accomplished.
Mm-hmm. So that podcast is basically to for you to enlighten us what will BI will become in next 10 years. So we'll break it up into like two major areas. One is you telling us what is BI and how did you build your career in BI, and second, help our viewers uh, on how they can build their career in different roles at BI.
Well, in the early days of BI, database reasonably priced databases started to become available from, let's say, Microsoft and Sybase. And so, that was back in the late 90s. And it was a natural progression, I think, for a lot of businesses to then say, oh, hey, we have this data available. It's not just on a mainframe anymore, where it's difficult to access and we need to write COBOL and things like that. We now can use, languages like T-SQL to, access that data. And as people got better at it and were able to write and then design tables, that began the whole process of extracting data out and bringing it into tables to be able to then display reports. That was the very beginning of BI, very unstructured. It was
And this was when
answering
90s.
let's say in the 90s, yes. There were people working like Kimball and Inman who were starting out with, their principles of design, but not yet widely published and there was not really a practice.
Right.
So most people didn't even call it business BI then. I mean, they simply wanted to answer a question like, for example, I worked for a coffee roaster for some time. Um, and they wanted to answer the questions like, where do most of our sales come from? And so they have a wholesale market, retail market, and then an online market.
Right.
And so they're, basically building charts and like probably some of the early BI tools were things like crystal reports, which you'll find still are used to this day in much later versions. So there were still companies using things like that, but they just wanted to answer very specific questions, and that's all those tools are really good for.
Right.
Now comes along as we progress through time in the early 2000s, this concept of the data warehouse and even the enterprise data warehouse comes along.
Mm-hmm.
And you back in let's say 2005, I think I designed my first enterprise data warehouse. And this is, answering different types of questions. was kind of the next step in the evolution.
Right.
Then it was blending of data from different areas. I worked for one place that did self-help supported websites. They couldn't get their answer there. They would be transferred to a chat session. And then if that didn't work out, they would actually get to speak to a live person.
Mm-hmm.
So all that data had to be tied together across the spectrum about what the user experience was during that time. So you began to see actually, accessing different technologies to pull data together into a more comprehensive data warehouse with different elements in it. And then you come up to the area of subject areas now, or in enterprises, we talk about subject areas. For example, I'm currently working in uh, public sector with uh, benefits for people. And so we have different subject areas, we would call them, groups of benefits and things like that, and different mechanisms, how they get that information. They might have an online portal, they apply for benefits, and then they might have stuff comes in from offices, and then we have stuff on mainframes, things on other enterprise systems that do just very specific tasks. But we blend those all into what we call an enterprise data warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're able to start answering questions across the spectrum about, how are we servicing people and issues like that.
Mm. So you've seen so much depth of business intelligence when it was not there to, I mean, a full blown up version, everything from Tableau to Power BI to ClickView and Alteryx. I mean, seriously, if heaven exists, and what would you expect God to say to you when you arrive at the gate?
Well, if heaven existed, it wouldn't be coming from a mainframe. And, and, you know, I think that, also part of it during this transition is that everything was, everybody did everything in house. Now we have the cloud. And I can remember doing a cloud migration, even to what's it been now, probably 6, 7 years ago with SAP.
So from data mart to cloud.
Yes, we're actually taking all the data for an application. It wasn't a true business intelligence thing, but
Mm.
all the data from one place and migrating it to the cloud. So in government tends to be a little bit behind the public, what the private industries are doing.
Right.
And, really ideally we should be on the cloud and have things accessing data that way uh, through a lot of set of different tools, like R and Python and scripting tools. We're kind of it's funny because we've developed all these visual tools to do all this work, like
Mm.
ETL work, where you basically drag and drop, and a lot of the SQL is written and embedded in these visual objects. Whereas now we're heading to things, where you actually many of the jobs at Amazon, for example, require that scripting, Python scripting,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
things like that. So you're going back to actually how very similar ways you would write stuff in T-SQL.
Right.
So ideally, everything would be on the cloud, and then within the cloud, want to be able to integrate things like I'll use SAP HANA, for example, and there's an excellent presentation out there that how you can put a columnar in-memory database solution into the cloud, and it's highly scalable along with everything you need. So on the cloud, you can just make a request for more resources or less resources, and it's dynamic because you're just basically taking a chunk out of a virtual environment, and so it can expand
Mm-hmm.
to a huge capacity approaches, mainframe power. And uh, yeah, so that would be amazing. It would be if I was at heaven waiting to go in, tell
That's
St. Peter that, hey, we're here on the cloud. And
so that's how Azure and AWS are minting money, right? Giving this cloud services for data warehouses.
yes, it seems like those are the two industry leaders right now. IBM is right behind them, and then SAP is also right behind, I think, IBM. So these companies have had cloud technologies, and so as I remember even working in a system at Microsoft where I used the beginnings of what Azure is now to actually just run a backup system,
Mm,
kind of a disaster recovery scenario,
right,
nothing complicated.
right.
And now it's evolved into where you have Hadoop and data lakes and things like that. And the data is an important key thing is that as we built these data warehouses, they were quite structured. Almost everyone followed what the Kimball technology in the building of the physical structure. And we have fact tables and dimension tables and things like that.
Mm,
But you can still have all that in the cloud. But you also have other things like data lakes where you can pour in much unstructured data and then blend it with other maybe structured data.
right.
And so you're seeing this kind of like we went from taking everything that was kind of all messy, cleaning it and structuring it and creating data quality
Mm,
to now putting it in a much more loose environment where one of the problems we have is that there aren't a lot of tools out there that deal with data quality in the cloud
mm,
in these things. We
mm.
get better answers, but we don't have like the cleanliness of the data that you might see in a more structured data warehouse.
Right, right. And I've been looking and following a few tools, the new BI tools of late, and I've observed one thing that they're trying to remove the dependency on technical people like architect or developers, so that even regular business guys could access or ask any question to the data they want. I mean, they're not completely dependent on the developers or the architects.
Yes, that's true, and I think Tableau was one of the front runners in that, in doing things. Yes, I worked in the banking industry, set up Tableau, and training people on it was very simpler. And now you have that and other reporting tools that make it easier for an end user. But one of the things is that many organizations forget is that there's this little thing we talk about called metadata
Mm,
and data governance. And what's happened, a lot of times people built up these great data warehouses, and maybe they're on the cloud and stuff, but if they don't know the meaning of what is in the data, then it's useless to them because they don't know what they're pulling.
mm,
They can drag and move things around and pull it all together, and they think, voila, I've come up with an answer. And
mm,
then eventually they find a data architect, and the data architect says, well, that's all well and good, except you've chosen the wrong column over here as the criteria,
right.
because the meaning of it is this. And so you really need to have that balance of data governance, data stewardship, in the enterprise so that a layperson can understand what it is how to derive the answer they want
Right.
without understanding that meaning, if the data is not as helpful, and you tend to see people come up with a lot of wrong answers,
Mm,
especially with very complicated scenarios where you have supply chains, or like in my sector, public health, or even in the medical profession, with medical data. If they're not pulling things correctly, we're still in this transition where we're trying to bring over stuff from legacy systems and blend it maybe with cognitive data,
mm,
and so that uh, again adds more layers. to things where people can actually come up with more wrong answers. So I
and
don't see the
sorry.
role of data architect going away.
Hmm. And what do you see? Coming back to the topic of our podcast, what do you think BI will become in next 10 years? I mean, I put a big dash on the episode name.
Well, I think, in doing some reading and research and just the general consensus that I get from a fair number of people is that things will be more structured. Pretty soon, everyone will adopt kind of maybe a standard transaction type system,
Hmm.
kind of like XML is a language that can handle many transactions.
Correct.
That hasn't been adopted universally yet. But as we see move to things like blockchain,
Hmm.
I think we'll see that as kind of a standard type of transaction where tracking that will end up in a data warehouse and can end up there quite quickly. So this blockchain can move, transaction. Basically, the blockchain would be a chunk of a transaction.
Hmm.
Could move from creating a sales order, creating a whole bunch of different other things as it gets processed to the system, sent to a vendor,
Hmm.
and then that transaction is recorded in the data warehouse immediately in the cloud, and no one touches it. It's all very transparent.
Right.
I think what you're going to see is that transparency. One of the things is though is that with that you still have to maintain that data governance about what's going on with that transaction. Like within XML, if you don't know what the elements are and what it means, it's useless. And same with information in the data warehouse. So I think the information about the information is still one of the things you're going to see, and people are beginning to realize the value of that. And I think what you're seeing in the market now is like people are like, wow, we got this great system, we get this data, all this works great, but we don't know what it is. So there'll be a larger growth in data governance, and data architects and our enterprise architects will be more concerned about data governance, more of a top-down scenario than they were maybe in the past, and even now we're more of a bottom-up structuring of just kind of tying the data together at a physical layer.
Right.
So be more transaction based, happen very quickly, and be there will be more standards and adoptions of standards. And I think we'll go back to visual tools for those will still improve more and more.
Right.
Uh, but we'll also see the tools that help build the transaction flows become visual and easier to use as well.
Will the issues related to metadata and data governance, like you pointed out before, will they moderate a bit after getting blockchain into this?
Well, I think there'll always be a need for it because as you create more and more transactions based upon that type of technology,
Mm.
you're still going to need to know about the data and how to describe it, how to create the transaction. So, you know, you it's historically, something that you might have done, like I might have done 20 years ago,
Hmm.
I might run across a very similar scenario today. It's just different technology that we're using.
Right.
So the same principles apply as far as being able to have that metadata and data governance, and that will still apply in the future. And I think that that's where we're going to see on the technological side, we're going to see smoother transactions that integrate into a much more flexible data warehouse where it's just able to automatically translate transaction-based information, and we're going to see instantaneous results. We a lot of data warehouses still depend on batch jobs that run at night and populating from the previous day, but I think we're going to see things that are going to be pretty much instantaneous, and that's really where the market wants to go is to be, I want to see what's happening right now. I don't want to wait till tomorrow. I want to know what's going on now.
Right. And so as on today, where do you see BI as a huge success from, say, 10 years ago? And where do you see as a huge failure? I mean, there's lot of scope of improvement.
Well, I've taken on my fair share of failed projects, and I think many times it's always about that the root cause many times comes down to a lack of understanding about how the data warehouse was built, and maybe there were special rules applied that weren't documented,
Mm.
and sometimes it's just plain documentation, and then having that data governance around your data. For example, you know, to a bank, what defines a customer? And the rule may be that it's a person with a unique social security number, and that is the key criteria.
Right.
And but that was never defined. And all of a sudden you come along and define it, and gee, you had this many customers today, here, and then you put your new rule in place, and now only you have this many customers. So understanding how these changes affect your data and making sure they're communicated across the organization when changes like that are made are very, very critical. And that's where I see the biggest fault in a lot of projects is basically the isolation and siloing of IT is still there. It needs to come out. It needs to be integrated into the business processes
Mm.
so that we have this flow of data that's going to happen. Also needs to be a flow of data between business groups within an organization.
Mm. Often I see a lot of IT uh, blending with business groups, but I agree with you. It still operates in silo. I mean, it doesn't get the same. The integration is not so strong today.
Yes, I think so too. I think we're seeing more and more of, and one of the things I've always had on my resume is I've always made a statement similar. I don't have it in front of me, but something to the effect uh, I work to ensure that the business processes meet the data needs of the organization.
Mm.
And so use those two concepts together because they are not so much interchangeable, but they're very much dependent upon each other.
Correct.
Even though you may have true data architects who might say, hey, data is data. I just care about the data. We need to open our minds and we have to stand back and sometimes look with a much wider lens at what is going on rather than focusing on, gee, does this need to be a bar car, or should it be an integer or whatever?
And if somebody wants to build a career in, say, BI, what are the different kind of roles that are possible? Um,
The roles, I think that you see things like the term data scientist has become quite prominent lately, and I think that that's a good name for someone who's heavily into analytics and really complicated economic analysis, for example.
mhm.
And so you see that one end of the spectrum where it's more based upon mathematics and statistics and analytics to people who specialize, in uh, driving the data into the data warehouse, and then the people in between who might make it available. But to see that, there was a very interesting article about the magic unicorn, about how nowadays you people want someone like who knows about the cloud, knows about this, knows about that,
Like a
and then they,
full stack developer who's expected to know everything in full stack developer, like in web developer.
yeah, Yeah, they want to see the developer who has, cloud experience, this experience, that experience, and those people don't exist. You can't become good enough at one thing.
Mhm.
You can have a broad spectrum, but you also have to focus in some area to become good at it. So you kind of have to pick segments. You might have work in different segments throughout your career. Those people starting out who want to start out, I think just you know learning how to translate what a business wants into a technological solution, or just simply being able to take what they want and simply pulling it through a simple language like T-SQL to start out with is a great way to start to get that basic understanding, and that will always be true. Um, but then taking it a step further is like, how can we automate this? How can we make it faster? How can we make the users understand it better? How can they make better use of it?
Mm. And which tools do each of these roles need to know, and what are the kind of prerequisites if I want to be, say, a BI architect or a BI analyst or, say, data scientist, what you recently said?
Well, let's say a data scientist, you might use SAS, and that would be a popular tool that would be used out there.
Hmm.
But you might also use things like R or even Python scripting to come up with answers. So some of the languages. And then there's just in the architecture arena itself, there's knowing about the different types of technologies and the differences between them, and different calls that they make, like AWS versus Azure, and people have this thing, which one is better? Well, they both have advantages and disadvantages. So knowing those tools are great. You have to remember that if you look at the long term of things, that just knowing about programming is key. The fundamentals, if then else, and things like that
Hmm.
are still thought processes that you use in scripting languages and analysis. Uh, Even something as basic as that. Um, some of the tools, I mean, we're still going to see better and better uh, tooling, but I don't think the tooling on the technological side is going to change as much as what's the trending now for, blending together the business process of data governance and all that. We're going to start seeing better tools around that, and then translating that maybe through like we use UML today.
Hmm.
There may be new things that come out, that the tools that will translate the business and the meaning and what it is the business wants to a technological solution. And that has to be a much smoother flow of information, where now you have one tool here, you have to manually translate it into another tool, and things like that.
Hmm.
Like, you can't take a business requirement and translate it into a data model. But someday I see that in the future, where if we might have tools that write requirements that
Wow.
then they, they turn that into a data model that can be pushed to the cloud
I,
and automatically populated.
mm,
We will begin to see that level of integration. I really hope that that's the case, because right now, it's like, you know, you might be a developer, you might need to be an expert in a certain language or certain tool set, but you also might know Visio uh, or even Word documentation. All those skills are still very, very important to know all that.
right, right. One last question. So, what advice on the architecture side, the BI architecture side, what advice would you give to people who want to get into this, and for somebody else who spent some considerable time here, what advice would you like to give that person?
Well, if they wanted to get into the architecture field, I think, again, knowing how basically to get data helps you understand how it's formed.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you begin to understand what physical structures are there in place and what they mean and how they're built. Uh, we used to worry a lot about, and as a person who was both a DBA and an architect, so you have one person who's worried about, gee, the physical structure of this needs to be partitioned and things like that in such a way that it's going to perform well because it's such a large data set.
Mm-hmm.
That's DBA hat you put on. As the architect, you're just saying, hey, I just want this information, this way. I don't, I'll let the DBA handle that. But we're going to see more, hopefully, keep that integration going where there's more communication between development and operation. So, knowing, I guess what I'm trying to say is knowing what data structures are important and knowing some of the history behind them, and then also just knowing how to mine using tools that go with Hadoop, but R and Python and scripting tools. I mean, you can't go wrong with learning those tools, those analytic tools, or scripting tools. Yeah, and then just basic T-SQL. I think those are all things that you can use. And once you have those skills down, you just need to get the information on where you're pointing the data to,
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't matter if it's at the computer at your desk or in the cloud. You still use the same language.
Right. And
It's just,
what blogs or books would you recommend? I mean, something which you respect as authors or thought leaders.
there are many. I tend to use a lot of social media for references and book references.
Mm-hmm.
There's much information out there, and in fact, some even free classes. For example, AWS, I think, is promoting a free account along with some course materials.
Correct.
But you'd be surprised how much good quality, inexpensive materials are out there to get started in this,
Mm-hmm.
this thing. Um, I can remember days in my career when I would take certification after certification, like for Novell and for Microsoft and things like that. And I finally just, once you get the foundation, yes, those pieces of paper are great, and you need them when you're starting out. But as you build your career, you're going to find you may not need them, but you're going to have to keep up on the technologies, and you've got to prove to someone that you kept up on them. So you're going to see this continued growth for certification and stuff like that.
Right.
So you get certified in one of the cloud solutions, either AWS or Azure, it would be a good start from for an architect. Still knowing even tools like learning how to use Irwin data modeling or ER Studio
Mm-hmm.
would be excellent tools to learn because they now have cloud connections built in and connect to all sorts of diverse data sources. I mean, you can even reverse engineer Tableau data sets that you've created, all sorts of things.
Right.
So learning a data modeling tool is still not a bad thing and will probably never go away because there will be some design nature. You can, even the design of your data lake can be done now in these tools.
You remind
Enterprise,
you remind me of Albert Einstein's quote. I mean, uh, you can be a simple guy, but you need to be passionately curious. I mean, to grow in your career, you continuously need to learn.
I think that's the key thing is that you have to say to yourself, you're not just coming in to do a job. You're coming in to this career because you want to learn something every day. And if you don't take that attitude, you will fall behind and um, find yourself on the sidelines someday. And it doesn't have to be an aggressive thing. It just needs to be passion is something that you make part of your day.
Right. Should be continuous
Uh,
rather than aggressive.
yeah. And that also brings into to the spirit of how you do things. It used to be very, very, let's say, very, very competitive. And I think I can see times in my career where I was that way when I was younger. But I think now it's more about mentoring and working together and people sharing, their different disciplines with each other. It's much more academic in sharing that information, mentoring each other. um, it makes a big difference in how organizations are successful in BI. If they just say, "Hey, I want that magic unicorn guy sitting at that desk there, and I need 3 of them, and we'll put them all there and let them do their work, and we'll get our answers." And I mean, many companies feel that way, but having good social skills and building teams and then sharing that, I mean, multiple minds can always come up with better answers than one single mind. And that's key.
That's
There's a
true.
whole social element of data architecture. And you need to have the social skills, the technical skills, and the passion. I think those are three key things that will allow you to be successful.
That's great advice, Brian. Great advice. So, so we come to the end of this podcast. Brian, thank you so much for taking your time. I'm sorry, it's really early morning for you too. Um, but thanks a lot again.
Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate it.
So, friends, if
Yeah.
you have any question for Brian, just leave those questions in the description. Brian, I'll also share your LinkedIn profile in the description. So, if somebody wants guidance or mentorship, they can reach out to you directly.
Yes. Yes. And my schedules, sometimes I do get busy, but I will always respond.
Excellent.
So, okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you so
much.
much, Brian.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye bye.